Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. The State and Foreign Operations and Related Programs Subcommittee serves a vital role in supporting our national security by appropriating funds for diplomacy, development, and humanitarian response worldwide. Civilian contributions to the administration's strategy are integral to the success of the military and the stability of Afghanistan and the region. For example, there are effective programs funded by the U.S. government, like the National Solidarity Program, the maternal and child health programs, that have contributed to local development and increased stability in regions of the country. However, due to recent allegations of rampant corruption and theft of U.S. government assistance, concerns with billions in cash leaving Kabul airport, and alleged influence peddling and interference with and obstruction of corruption investigations by Afghan officials, I deferred consideration of the $3.9 billion requested for foreign assistance to Afghanistan in fiscal year 2011. The State Department's assessment that such activities undermines our civil-military mission and our responsibility to ensure Americans' hard-earned tax dollars are not squandered or mismanaged, especially in this time of economic recovery, require our urgent and thorough examination. Now, I want to make it very clear to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that $4.1 billion has been appropriated for civilian-led assistance programs in Afghanistan in the FY 2010 bill, and $1.7 billion has been appropriated in the FY 2010 supplemental for civilian-led assistance programs in Afghanistan that passed the House July 1st and which the Senate will consider in the coming weeks. It is my understanding that 90% of 2010 funds remain unobligated as programs are being developed now. Therefore, the 2011 bill will not become law until the fall, after both chambers consider it, and we have the responsibility, the obligation, and the time to protect taxpayer money and get the process right. And I am very pleased that the administration understands that we need accountability, and they have agreed to work with us. I welcome the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, retired Major General Arnold, the USAID Inspector General, Donald A. Gambatesa, the Director of International Relations and Trade of the Government Accountability Office, Charles Johnson. These government watchdogs will provide insight into their audit and investigation findings to date, existing mechanisms to safeguard our assistance dollars, any gaps in oversight, and any evidence they have uncovered of corruption, graft within programs under this committee's jurisdiction. Just yesterday, the GAO released a report entitled, quote, "Enhancements to Performance Management and Evaluation Efforts Could Improve USAID's Agricultural Programs," which outlined concerns with management and oversight of significant U.S.-funded agriculture and alternate development programs in Afghanistan. Similar to previous reports, its findings indicate compromised effectiveness, including the lack of project management, defined goals and outcomes, and direct oversight. Please outline for us today additional procedures that USAID should implement to more clearly define goals and measure and validate outcomes. Because the President's strategy depends on the capability of the Afghans to govern effectively, we look forward to your evaluation of the level of commitment of Afghan officials to improve governance and accountability. For example, Are senior Afghan government officials impeding investigations into bribery and corruption? And if so, what action is being taken by United States government and Afghan officials to stop such interference and move forward with prosecutions? What steps has the Afghan government taken to support anti-corruption efforts, and do you believe they are effective? Especially given President Karzai's call this past Monday for the international community to channel 50% of donor assistance through Afghan government ministries, it is essential that the government of Afghanistan be capable of managing international assistance in an effective, transparent, and accountable manner. Have the Department of State and USAID established conditions on the provisions of direct assistance to Afghan ministries? If so, what are they? Are the conditions adequate? Are assessments or certifications of Afghan ministries underway? If so, who is undertaking these assessments? And what is the process? What recommendation do you have for the administration and Congress to strengthen the assessment and certification process and provide greater assurance that any funding channeled through Afghan ministries is properly monitored, programmed, and executed? And finally, this committee is under no illusions about the difficulty of implementing programs in Afghanistan, including security threats, a nascent banking system, challenges in identifying and developing credible local partners, among many other factors. In fact, just in the last 2 days, 8 American servicemen were killed, and today, 5 Ministry of Health employees were kidnapped in Kandahar while on a health mission to help their countrymen. Our hearts and prayers go out to both our soldiers and their families who have made the ultimate sacrifice, and to the Afghans who are risking their lives to rebuild their country. To ensure effectiveness of our assistance in this environment, this committee has increased funding for inspectors general, mandated close consultation on implementation of U.S.-funded programs. In fact, some of the concerns we will address today may have been uncovered as a result of this expanded investigative capacity and the government of Afghanistan's increasing ability to monitor funds and programs. Our discussion today of the systems currently in place to safeguard United States assistance from fraud and abuse, and your insights on additional steps the subcommittee should take will help us in our work in refining the fiscal year 2011 bill before it goes through the entire process and becomes law, we hope, in the fall. Before turning to Ranking Member Granger, let me close by saying that the subcommittee intends to hold an additional hearing and briefings with other top administration officials to examine ongoing efforts to provide accountability and thwart corruption in Afghanistan. With such high stakes, and we know how high the stakes are, any gaps identified by our witnesses today must be immediately addressed to provide confidence to the American people that funds for assistance for Afghanistan continue to advance our mission and support our troops in the field. I would like to turn to my ranking member, Kay Granger, for her statement before we proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling for this very important hearing on oversight of U.S. civilian assistance for Afghanistan. I understand this will be the first in a series of hearings. The Chair outlined that. that we will be holding, and I agree there are many issues that should be addressed, and I hope will be addressed in these hearings. Let me begin by saying I share the Chair's concerns about the disturbing news reports coming out almost every day highlighting the corruption problem in Afghanistan. We're all eager to get to the bottom of those allegations. I'd also like to cite some of the most alarming results of recent surveys. A UN report earlier this year showed that more Afghans are concerned about corruption than any other public problem. Transparency International's most recent survey again ranked Afghanistan as one of the most corrupt places in the world. And just last week, an Afghanistan-based group revealed a new study showing that bribery may be a billion-dollar business. Corruption is not something that can be fixed overnight, but we must do all we can. This subcommittee must take decisive action to ensure that the U.S. taxpayer funds are used as they were intended to be used. At the same time, I want to be sure that the subcommittee's actions support the broader strategy on the ground in Afghanistan. The strategy was not intended to be solely a military endeavor. The civilian side was inherently linked to the overall. As General Petraeus noted in his June 15th testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee, a critically important part of our civilian-military campaign in Afghanistan is promoting broad-based economic and infrastructure development. With this in mind, I remain concerned about any potential negative impact that withholding foreign assistance could have while U.S. military and civilians are on the ground. That's why it's essential that we hear from the witnesses before us today to get a better understanding of the oversight that's being conducted. I also look forward to another hearing with senior administration officials who are responsible for executing the civilian side of the Afghanistan strategy. I want to welcome today's witnesses. They're very important in what we're learning and how we'll move forward. Each of you and your organizations play a critical role in preventing and detecting waste, fraud, and abuse of foreign assistance dollars, and I thank you for your service. The Chair has already laid out many questions for you to answer, all of which deserve your attention, but there are a few additional matters I would like for you to address. First, I want to know that funds invested in Afghanistan are achieving tangible results. This starts by ensuring that programs are free from corruption, which I know we'll discuss in great detail today, but it also means that U.S.-funded programs have clear goals and objectives that are tracked and measured over time. When I visited Afghanistan last fall, I was stunned by the lack of progress there. With roughly $50 billion invested by the U.S. since 2002, results are difficult to see. This can't continue. Accountability and a focus on results must be part of the culture of U.S. agencies, and that should funnel all the way down to the implementers, the Afghan government, contractors, grantees, international organizations, and the multiple levels of awardees below them. I would appreciate hearing your thoughts on how we can move toward a focus on results and accountability. Next, I want to have confidence that sending more assistance through Afghanistan's institutions and non-governmental organizations is the best course of action. I recognize the need to build the capacity of the government and local groups, but given the recent allegations, now is not the time to subject U.S. funds to unnecessary risk. If the administration continues with this Afghan First initiative, more than $1 billion could be distributed in this way. I believe this policy deserves intense scrutiny, and I would like to hear your assessment and any recommendations that the subcommittee should consider. I also want to discuss the civilian personnel strategy in Afghanistan. I understand that the positions have tripled in the last 18 months, but I want to determine if the people who are filling those slots have the right skills to oversee such large programs and in such a difficult operating environment. I'd like to hear your thoughts and any recommendations in this area as well. In closing, I look forward to getting a better understanding of the work your organizations have already undertaken and the work that's planned to address waste, fraud, and abuse. Your testimony will help the subcommittee have confidence in providing the funds necessary to support the President's strategy in Afghanistan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I want to congratulate both you and Kay Granger for beginning this series of very important hearings. The American public, to say the least, is skeptical about our having foreign assistance programs in the first place. The average taxpayer often thinks that we're spending 10 or 15 or 20% of our national product on foreign aid, as it were. You all know that it's considerably below that, well below 1%, as a matter of fact, flows into these areas. But nonetheless, the reports that have raised the kind of alarm and concern that the chairwoman has expressed concern about very much feed that public doubt about whether these programs are worthwhile at all. While I really support strongly efforts to help you give us insight as to what actually is happening on the ground, please know that this is not a partisan consideration. Foreign assistance has to reflect American interest, efforts that we can make to make sure those dollars that are delivered get to those people we portend to want to help in the first place is critical. One area of interest of mine that I'd appreciate your addressing, if you can, involves a long-standing interest about programs we may or may not be carrying forward effectively, dealing with the poppy and the impact that those poppy fields have had to feed our enemies, if you will, to provide funding flows that do not help farmers for certain, but instead help warlords. I'd like to know, here's more about your evaluation as to programs to strengthen the agricultural sector in Afghanistan outside of the poppy. Any reporting you can give us in connection with that would be very much appreciated. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I want to alert you all that we may have votes in about an hour. Your statements have certainly been submitted for the record, and to the extent that you feel comfortable summarizing, please proceed as you will. And we, in terms of the panel, we will proceed as usual, go from one side to the other, giving each member 5 minutes. So why don't we begin with Mr. Fields, and again, we thank you for appearing here today.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Granger, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you. Can you hear me now, sir? How about now? Thank you. Okay, that got it. Again, thank you very much for inviting me to participate at this very important hearing. I appreciate the introductory comments, Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Granger and Representative Lewis. I've provided the committee with a longer statement, which I will now summarize. Recent press reports have alleged that billions of dollars have been transported out of Afghanistan via the Kabul airport. We do not know at this time whether these dollars are from Reconstruction funds or not. However, our investigators are aggressively working with other federal agencies to determine the source of this currency. The lack of visibility into the movement of money and financial transactions in Afghanistan is one of many issues that puts Reconstruction dollars at risk. We have identified problems in 4 broad areas: accountability, sustainment, metrics, and capacity development. That must be addressed to improve the effectiveness of the Reconstruction program and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. The U.S. government does not have an integrated management system that provides complete and accurate data on all Reconstruction activities. It does not have a comprehensive database on Reconstruction contracts. Such systems, especially given the high turnover of staff, both civilian and military, would help to better manage U.S. projects. The U.S. government has very little visibility into the activities of some subcontractors. This must change. SIGAR has identified sustainment issues in every audit it has conducted of an infrastructure project. Not only is the Afghan government unable to pay for the operations and maintenance of donor-funded infrastructure, it cannot pay for most of its basic operating expenses, including salaries. The international community is providing 85% of the Afghan national budget. We are finding that U.S. implementing agencies must do a better job of establishing and tracking metrics to help determine if a program is making progress and is sustainable. For example, our recent audit of the Capabilities Milestone Rating System found that the system could not provide reliable or consistent assessments of Afghan security forces' capabilities, a part of the reconstruction effort to which the United States alone has already invested over $27 billion. The U.S. Reconstruction strategy emphasizes building Afghan capacity to govern. The Department of State is implementing this strategy by deploying more civilian experts to work in partnership with Afghans and channeling more reconstruction dollars through Afghan institutions. SIGAR is conducting an audit of the civilian surge to assess the extent to which these civilians are being deployed effectively to achieve U.S. reconstruction goals. We are also conducting a series of audits to do basically two things. One, examine U.S. and donor efforts to build Afghanistan's institutional capacity to deter corruption and to strengthen the rule of law. And two, the extent to which Afghan institutions have the systems in place to account for donor funds. These audits are having an impact. I'm pleased to say that USAID has since told us that it plans to provide up to $30 million over the next 3 years to support the High Office of Oversight, Afghanistan's key anti-corruption body. And the U.S. Embassy in Kabul reported that it is working with donors to develop the capacity of the Control and Audit Office, the institution responsible for auditing Afghanistan's public finances. There are many challenges to providing assistance in a war zone, but we must do a better job to ensure that taxpayer dollars are not wasted. Building Afghanistan capacity to deter corruption and strengthen the rule of law will be the key to protecting U.S. funds from fraud and abuse. SIGAR is committed to providing oversight in a timely fashion so that our implementing agencies can make course corrections before U.S. resources are wasted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Field. Mr. Gambatesa.
Good morning. You got me? Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Lowy, Ranking Member Granger, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify on the oversight of USAID programs in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's reputation for corruption and fraud is well known. As Ranking Member Granger reported in her opening remarks, a January 2010 report from the United Nations stated that it is almost impossible to obtain a public service in Afghanistan without paying a bribe. The latest Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index ranks Afghanistan at 179 out of 180 countries, the second worst in the world. The U.S. Agency for International Development has obligated over $9 billion in Afghanistan and currently has more than 400 civilian and Foreign Service national personnel overseeing approximately 100 ongoing grants and contracts worth more than $7 billion. Since fiscal year 2003, we have conducted 34 performance audits and made 128 recommendations for improvements and issued 33 financial audits with nearly $100 million in sustained question costs. We have also initiated more than 70 investigations with recoveries and savings of approximately $150 million. Moreover, in the past 2 years alone, we have referred 10 individuals for prosecution in the United States or Afghanistan. We have a great deal of experience conducting fraud investigations in Afghanistan, and we work collaboratively with our colleagues from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and other law enforcement agencies, as well as Afghan police officials and prosecutors. Although the Afghan government has not interfered with any of our investigations, we sometimes have difficulty pursuing a case because of concerns for the security of informants and witnesses. Individuals who provide us with information are often reluctant to continue to participate in investigations out of fear for their safety. In these instances, we share relative information with appropriate U.S. government agencies within the Kabul embassy. With regard to the subcommittee's concern about funds being transported out of Afghanistan, we have no evidence linking USAID assistance programs to the large quantities of U.S. dollars that are reportedly being shipped. Although Afghanistan is largely a cash economy, most USAID funds are provided to contractors and grantees through electronic transfers. In some situations, sums of money, generally under $25,000, are paid in cash, as in the Cash for Work programs. In these situations, controls have been put in place to ensure that funds have been used for their intended purpose. USAID has the following systems in place to prevent fraud and abuse: pre-award surveys of contractors and grantees, annual financial audit requirements for contracts, grants, and subawards, financial reporting requirements for contractors who receive advance payments, and program monitoring by USAID and third parties. Despite these controls, however, oversight is not as robust as it should be, and USAID does not have a sufficient number of qualified personnel on the ground to monitor projects effectively. However, the agency is developing a more effective monitoring and evaluation process to include increasing staffing and training. Our office supplements USAID's oversight by performing financial audits and reviewing public accounting firms to determine whether they're eligible to audit agency funds. Financial auditors pay special attention to control over cash. We also conduct concurrent financial audits of the highest risk programs, such as infrastructure programs, to provide early detection of potential problems. As part of the government's commitment to the Paris Declaration principles, USAID is channeling increasing levels of development funding directly to the government of Afghanistan. By leading the resulting development projects, the Afghan government can build public confidence in its ability to deliver programs that improve the welfare of the people. However, Afghanistan is still developing the capacity to manage projects and monitor and account for associated resources. This places federal dollars in greater risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. USAID must develop an approach to building Afghanistan's capacity that balances the imperative for local engagement in the development process with effective stewardship of taxpayers' dollars. This concept of effective stewardship of taxpayers' dollars is also critical for budget support provided to the Afghan government through trust funds or other instruments managed by international organizations. My office does not have audit rights to these funds, and oversight of these funds become the responsibility of the implementing entity or the Afghanistan's Control Audit Office. The following steps could be considered to minimize risk associated with funding assistance programs in Afghanistan. One would be to require that direct assistance to the government of Afghanistan be committed through specific projects, so that rather than budget funding, so that USAID funds can be traced to its end use. Require concurrent audits of USAID's direct assistance to the government of Afghanistan. Adopt specific contracting practices for Afghanistan and other conflict settings that limit the tiers of subcontractors and subgrantees so that we don't have these subs of subs of subs. In addition to the options I mentioned, my office can take the following actions as resources permit to further mitigate risk. We can review USAID's pre-award survey and certification process to determine whether further strengthening is required. We can also conduct a review of cash disbursement practices employed by program implementers to see if what we're hearing is really correct as far as the control over the cash. And increase participation with other federal agencies that are following the trail of expenditures in Afghanistan. We share the subcommittee's concerns that funding appropriated to foreign assistance programs in Afghanistan not be wasted or channeled to those who wish to do us harm. I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you very much. Now we're very happy to hear from Mr. Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Granger, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here to discuss oversight of U.S. assistance programs in Afghanistan. Strengthening the Afghan economy through development assistance efforts is critical to the U.S. counterinsurgency strategy and a key part of the United States civilian military campaign plan for Afghanistan. Since fiscal year 2002, the U.S. Agency for International Development has awarded over $11.5 billion in support of development assistance programs in Afghanistan. Since 2003, the GAO has issued several reports and testimonies related to U.S. efforts in Afghanistan. In addition to reviewing program planning and implementation, we have focused on efforts to ensure proper management and oversight of the U.S. efforts. These are essential to reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. Over the course of this work, we've identified improvements that were needed, as well as obstacles that have affected success and should be considered in program management and oversight. While drawing on past work relating to U.S. development efforts in Afghanistan, I will focus much of my testimony today on findings in our most recently released report, which was just released yesterday, on the USAID's management and oversight of its agricultural programs in Afghanistan. My statement today will address the challenges the U.S. faces in managing and overseeing development programs and the extent to which the USAID has followed its existing and established performance management and evaluation procedures. To start, I would like to note that various factors challenge U.S. efforts to ensure proper management and oversight of U.S. efforts in Afghanistan. Among the most significant has been the high-threat working environment that U.S. and others are working in, the difficulties in preserving institutional knowledge due to the lack of formal mechanisms for retaining and sharing information during high staff turnover, and the Afghan government ministry's lack of capacity and corruption challenges. It is also worth noting that the USAID has taken some steps to assess and begin addressing the limited capacity of the Afghan ministries and to address corruption challenges associated with those ministries. USAID has established performance management and evaluation procedures that are already in place to help oversee its programs. These procedures, among other things, require the development of a mission performance management plan, the establishment and approval of implementing partner performance indicators and targets, and the analysis and use of performance data. We have found, however, that the USAID has not consistently followed its established performance management and evaluation procedures. In particular, we found that the Afghanistan mission had been operating without an approved performance management plan to guide its management and oversight efforts after 2008. In addition, while implementing partners have routinely reported on the progress of USAID-funded programs, USAID did not always approve the performance indicators these partners were using, and did not ensure, as its procedures specifically require, that its implementing partners establish targets for each performance indicator. For example, only 2 of the 7 USAID-funded agriculture programs, which we highlighted in our most recently released report, during fiscal year 2009, had targets for all indicators. They actually lacked targets for all indicators as required. In the absence of consistent application of its existing performance management and evaluation procedures, USAID programs may remain more vulnerable to waste, fraud, and abuse. For example, GAO reported in 2009 that USAID's failure to adhere to its existing policies severely limited its ability to require expenditure documentation for an Afghanistan-related grant that was later associated with findings of alleged criminal actions and mismanagement of U.S. funds. To enhance the performance management of USAID's development assistance programs in Afghanistan, we have recommended, among other things, that the administrative USAID take steps to 1, ensure programs have performance indicators and targets, 2, fully assess and use the performance data and evaluations that it has collected or that it will collect to adjust current and future programs and address preservation of institutional knowledge. USAID has concurred with these recommendations and is in the process of developing a new performance management plan to guide its future efforts. We will continue to monitor and follow up on the implementation of all open GAO recommendations. This concludes my prepared statement, but before closing, I would like to note that the GAO looks forward to assisting the Congress and the administration in its efforts in Afghanistan, and I will be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and as I stated before, we will rotate from side to side. And We look forward to your response. I want to follow up, if I may, on the London conference in January 2010. Donors agreed to provide up to 50% of donor assistance directly through Afghan government mechanisms. In anticipation of the Kabul conference next week, President Karzai has called on donors to align assistance programs with Afghan priorities and move toward the 50% goal. First of all, can you describe what USAID has done to safeguard funding provided directly through the Ministries of Health and Finance? How much funding is provided through these sources on an annual basis? Does USAID anticipate providing direct support through other government ministries in fiscal year 2010? What process is USAID undertaking to assess the capacity of these ministries to receive direct assistance? And what could USAID or other U.S. government agencies do to increase the capacity of Afghan ministries that are being considered for direct government-to-government support? And several of you addressed changes that you're recommending in the oversight process. If there's anything else you'd like to add to that, that's perfect. And I would also like to know what oversight role does USAID have in reviewing programs and projects of the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund? Can USAID, IG, or the SIGAR audit funding channel through the trust fund? You may have a choice, whoever would like to respond.
Let me first address the ARTF, Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, and then I would be inclined to yield to my counterpart, IG, from USAID to discuss more of the details of your questions. First, we have not conducted an audit, per se, of the ARTF. The ARTF is administered by the UN, and our mandate, while broad, that I execute, does not necessarily include the UN and its mechanisms. However, it is my intent, and has been since I've been in this capacity, to pursue the U.S. dollar to whatever extent it may be, wherever it may reside. And so we have had a dialogue with the UN. And I believe that if this dialogue continues, I feel that we will be permitted, if jointly, to look into the ARTF, into which the international community has thus far invested $900 million, of which approximately $300 million has been invested by the United States. We also have conducted an audit of the Control and Audit Office, as I pointed out in my initial statement, and I feel that we can potentially conduct joint audits with the CAO, which is somewhat equivalent to our GAO, and accomplish matters associated with the ARTF and the extent to which those funds are being implemented through whichever institution in Afghanistan.
Remaining, Mr. Gambatesa.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the ARTF before I get into the other. As I said in my opening statement, that we really don't have any audit rights in ARTF funds. They would be, oversight would be provided by the World Bank or by the audit office in Afghanistan. However,
Even though $300 million of American funds are contributed.
yes, ma'am, they become fungible once they go into the account, and they basically lose their identity at that point.
Is there anything we can do about that?
Well, the agency does. Well, I'm not certain if we can do anything with that specific. All we can do is as auditors, all we can do is raise concerns to them and ask them to do something. But we have had dealings with UN organizations before, or international organizations, where they don't really have to listen to us. But the agency, the USAID, does have some amount of oversight into this process, from what I've been told, that they use a monitoring agent, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to check compliance with government internal controls. They participate in project identification and preparation and appraisal, and there's also a methodology they call preferencing, where a certain amount of funds that a government can contribute can be preferenced. And I don't know all the details, but there are certain ways they can do that, and it's a little bit complicated. The USAID reviews reports, financial reports, quarterly donor reports, and annual reports, basically saying how the funds were expended. So there is some oversight from the agency from the standpoint of quality control or due diligence, I guess is the best way to put it.
We'll catch Mr. Johnson on the next question because my time is up. But I would appreciate learning more about that because, as you mentioned, Mr. Fields, we have a responsibility, and you're looking at following all the dollars.
Absolutely.
And Norway has the responsibility for oversight of those funds, and we should be able to ask questions and pursue any trail that it leads. I thank you. Ms. Granger.
Yes, I want to follow up on that line of questioning that the chairman asked, because I want to focus on the ministries. The administration has their Afghan First initiative that we would be sending funds through the Afghanistan ministries. And I would like to understand, I understand these ministries have to be certified, so I'd like to understand more about the process for certification. And has the IG's office been involved in that? Because what I'm hearing, there aren't the people, and there's a history of corruption. There aren't enough people to do this oversight, and yet we're sending money directly to those Afghan ministries. So I would like some more information about that certification process, how reliable it is, and how that Afghan First is going to proceed.
May respond to that initially. Ranking Member Granger, GAO actually just initiated some work looking at the certification process that we're undertaking in terms of certifying Afghanistan ministries. And we think that in addition to that certification process, there needs to be controls in place to allow the U.S. to have access to certain financial information to be able to go in and look at and follow some of the dollars. So we're going to be looking at that as a part of our review in terms of what specific controls or policies or agreements do we have in place. I do want to note that it's important that the Afghan ministries, as we've noted before, have that capacity. So part of building the capacity of the Afghan government is, I think, our certification process before we provide them with direct funding is a part of that whole of government approach that we're taking. And so we're planning to look into that in particular.
And what kind of time frame is that?
We just initiated that review.
And how long should it take?
On average, we roughly are able to produce things in about 6 months, 6 to 8 months. But if there are any immediate needs, we can provide you with something sooner than that.
I would think that you would provide. In fact, I would request that you provide this committee, this subcommittee, with that information as it goes forward. So with a recommendation, 6 to 8 months puts us in a real delicate situation with the funding. Okay. If that process isn't in place and the safeguards aren't there. So I would.
We will be in a position to provide you with briefings on what we've learned.
Good. Yes.
We haven't as yet reviewed it, but we intend to review the process of this pre-certification. My understanding is that none of the funds, or very few of the funds, have gone to direct budget support. That thus far the ministries have received funding for specific projects, which obviously increases the accountability because they'd have to say what they've achieved with the program. As we mentioned, USAID is providing training and technical assistance when there's a lack of capacity. Oftentimes they'll use a contractor to go in, an accounting firm as such, to go in and assess the capability of the ministry to account for the funding, basically, to see if their internal controls and our accounting systems are such that they can actually provide a good sheet to us to determine that, in fact, the funds are being spent appropriately. And my understanding is they have blanket agreements with a number of CPA firms to go in and actually work, and they're local CPA firms, so they would not be U.S. firms.
So they're local contractors, Afghan contractors, that we're contracting to see if the Afghan government and the ministries can oversee these projects? Not the budget toward them, but the actual project. Is that right?
More so of the financials. If they have the capacity financially to oversee the funding, that's really on the financial side. And the other part, as far as the performance side, would be the training issue of whether the ministry has the proper training and expertise to actually implement the programs.
And that's also determined by a contractor in most cases. Is that right?
I'm not certain.
If I may also add, based on our preliminary work that we have done so far, we have, with respect to the 50% target that has been established, we have noticed that between fiscal year 2002 and 2010, there was roughly about 18.5 billion, 18.5% of our money has been provided for program support to the government of Afghanistan.
Would you say that again, please? Sorry, I didn't.
18.5% of our USAID's funding has been awarded for program support to the Afghan government. In fiscal year 2010 specifically, that has jumped up to 51%. So I think the direction towards the 50% for AID is taking place. But those are all preliminary numbers.
Thank you.
I'd like to just submit this letter for the record, a letter from Acting Mission Director Rebecca Black. I'm pleased to see that this issue is on the screen of many of the people who are here today. It begins, we request an increased focus on the fiduciary and governance framework of the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. So I think this is an important step in the right direction, and I thank you. Mr. Jackson, who arrived next? Mr. Jackson, you did.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I beat the clock just before you slammed the gavel. I'm grateful. Again, thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, and let me also welcome our guests to the hearing today. In perfect candor, I haven't heard very much today that gives me the impression that the United States government has done and or is doing everything that it can do to keep taxpayer dollars from being at risk in what almost universally each of you have indicated is the second most corrupt country in the world, just above Somalia. My confidence today has not been strengthened at all by the testimony of U.S. witnesses, and that is not to cast an aspersion upon the dedicated nature of your service to our nation. But as General Fields indicated, the high turnover in terms of civilian capacity on our side, the high turnover on the military side of our own efforts in Afghanistan certainly suggests that there's a continuity problem on our side, let alone the expectations that we have for the Afghan officials in monitoring these projects. I've introduced a bill to help with the reconstruction of Liberia. And one of the key aspects of the bill is to improve the capacity and professionalism of the civilian government. Improving governance is obviously imperative to providing sustainable development for Afghanistan. It is also a complex task that requires reform in virtually every ministry and every level of government. I'm interested in hearing from all of you, what in your judgment are the most pressing priorities for improving Afghan governance? And what areas of governing are making the most progress? What areas are also the most problematic? Let me start with General Fields.
Thank you very much, sir. First, if you permit me, sir, I wish to correct myself. I earlier mentioned that the UN oversees the ARTF. It's actually the World Bank that oversees the ARTF. But none of which, of course, precludes what I earlier said, that we will work with whichever entity we need to in order to ensure that the U.S. tax dollar is wisely used. In terms of what we're doing in Reconstruction, now let me say that we have spent or are spending $27 billion or more for the security aspect of Reconstruction. $15 billion over the course of our involvement in Afghanistan since 2002 for governance and development. So your question, sir, is very important because we have devoted a lot of money to reconstructing, if you will, the governance sector of Afghanistan. In terms of a direct answer to your question, I feel that much is underway in addressing governance in Afghanistan, but it is not nearly where it really needs to be, which is why the issue of corruption is such an agenda item of today. One failure that I would ask and recommend that we not make should we engage in another situation similar to Afghanistan is that I don't feel, and there's little evidence thus far discovered by my auditors and by me personally, to suggest that we started in 2002 building capacity in Afghanistan. And it's very difficult to build capacity in a nation as broken as Afghanistan has been and to a large extent still is. And I would encourage that our planners at all levels consider capacity at the forefront of an engagement by the United States into which so much money by the American taxpayer is to be invested. The justice system is still not adequate. We are working on it, and I feel that the United States Embassy is focusing on that area through training of judges and prosecutors, as well as building facilities in which they can carry out their work. But we are not there yet. We have conducted audits in this regard, and we have reported certain recommendations to the embassy, and we await responses sufficient to confirm that, in fact, they have turned to
General,
and are
let me just share with you for the committee, and then I'll conclude because I know my time has expired. I mean, $15 billion in governance and capacity building since 2002, and yet every member of this panel has to confront Washington Post article that asks the question, is the Afghan Attorney General on our side or not? Have your investigators found evidence that the Afghan Attorney General impeded investigations and prosecutions? And if so, is this the direction of the senior Afghan, is this at the direction of senior Afghan officials? Before this committee appropriates another dollar, whether or not taxpayer dollars are at risk fall within the purview of this committee and the purview of that ranking member to oversee that this money is being spent adequately. And what I am not hearing is that after $15 billion on governance that we're there, which means another $15 billion and another $15 billion and more articles like this, which every one of us has to go back home and explain to a constituent why it's either sufficient or insufficient or why we may need to pull our troops back. Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would each of you kind of give me a yes or no answer, since we're attempting to measure what's happened to American dollars in Afghanistan? Does your advice and counsel you get from people who have expertise within each of your organizations indicate to you that there's serious believability relative to those charges that suggest that huge amounts of cash, American cash, have been leaving Afghanistan with some regularity? And if you do see, if your answer is yes to that question, would you tell us short term what Jesse Jackson and I can do to see that those dollars go to the people we want to help in the first place and not go to somebody's bank account outside of Afghanistan? As much of a yes or no as possible from your background, I'd appreciate.
Yes, money is leaving Afghanistan, and this has been reported to me by my investigators. There are investigations underway, and which were underway prior to the media reporting on this matter. And we are not prepared at this time to give the final details because it's ongoing. But yes, sir, money is leaving, and this is money that's being declared as the so-called owners of it depart Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
I don't think there's any doubt that funds are leaving, but money's leaving, but whether they're USAID funds that have been diverted in some way is something that we don't know. And we have no indication, as I mentioned in my statement, that any USAID funds are being sent out of the country, basically, as I said earlier, because there's not that much cash out there.
If 85% of the government's budget comes from our assistance, certainly a yes sounds pretty close to being on the money to me.
Well, I'm not, I'm not
What are your
contradicting you. I'm saying that we have no information to show that any USAID funds are being shipped out of the country in pallets.
Okay.
I mean,
So your people, your support people are telling you that you think perhaps the answer is no rather than yes.
well, I think it's more we don't know.
Okay.
But I mean, absent positive knowledge to it, then you never want to say never, but we have nothing to indicate that it's for sure. I mean, I would say no, yes.
Okay. GAO, what?
Based on the work we perform, we don't have any specific evidence that money is leaving Afghanistan illegitimately. We have done some work in the past where we reported on allegations and misuse of U.S. funds that were provided through USAID. But other than that, we don't have any specific examples of money being flown out of Afghanistan inappropriately.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, before I turn to, who's next? Oh, they came in all. Mr. Schiff, Mr. Field, you are saying that you are in the process of conducting an investigation on those allegations, and you were before the media reports revealed the information. And we look forward to hearing the results of your examination. Do you have any idea of the time frame?
Not at this time. This is an investigation that we started really in March, and it was really another investigation that was underway, and a tip through that investigation led us to matters relating to the departure or exodus of money through the airports. I don't know, Madam Chairwoman, when we will have completed this, but I can assure you that we will work this as rapidly as we possibly can.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions which I'm going to try to state as quickly as I can, see how many we might get through. I want to follow up on the Chair's question, and maybe we just don't have enough information, but to the degree that money is leaving the country, and I don't know what's worse, the potential that this is U.S. taxpayer money that is leaving the country because it's been stolen, or whether this is U.S. taxpayer dollars or other international donor assistance that has not been stolen, but has been taken through the process and is being exported out of the country. Either way, it shows that some in the leadership in Afghanistan have no confidence in the nation's future, and that is, I think, a real vital concern for our effort. But I would be interested to know, to the degree that you can talk about it today, if there is money leaving the country, what's the likely source of it, and who are the likely players in terms of taking it out of the country. More broadly, I'd like to ask you about our anti-corruption strategy, which I'm very concerned about. It seems like our military is on one timeline, our anti-corruption strategy and our governance building is on a very different timeline, which may take years, decades, a generation. Who is in charge of our anti-corruption strategy? Is there a anti-corruption plan? My understanding is that the State Department or the embassy drafted an anti-corruption strategy, but that it's been sitting at the State Department for about a year now. And the only thing that's been released has been a corruption reporting guidance, which, among other things, established a email address for people to send reports of corruption, corruptiontf@gmail.com, but no one's monitoring the site. So people are evidently sending email reports of corruption, but there's nobody on the receiving end. So I'd be interested to know, are you familiar with this email address? Do you know if anybody's monitoring it? If you don't know, I would ask you to find out. as well as whatever happened to the anti-corruption strategy. Do we have adequate personnel working on governance and rule of law? We've had a military surge. We've had a civilian surge, but the civilian surge has been a lot less than the military surge. My understanding is there are 3 people at the embassy working on rule of law, 2 State Department people, 1 DOD person. Do we have adequate civilian personnel working on this anti-corruption strategy? So those are the questions that I have, as many as you might be able to get through.
Well, sir, let me comment on at least a few of them. First, I want to say that we identified anti-corruption as a missing component to the reconstruction effort in Afghanistan. From the work that we have done, very little, if anything, had been done prior to about a year ago to address anti-corruption in Afghanistan. We have thus far conducted 2 audits, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on the systems that need to be in place in order for anti-corruption to be properly addressed within the structure of the Afghanistan government. And therefore, our audits of the Control and Audit Office and the High Office of Oversight pertain to this. You reference to some extent the financial oversight and basic capacity of Afghanistan from an institutional standpoint. This is being addressed through the reconstruction effort, but it is one to which I think attention has been too lately provided. In terms of a reconstruction strategy, or rather reconstruction strategy relating to anti-corruption, there is one that has been put in place by the U.S. Embassy. An official, once again trying to bring some degree of emphasis to this matter, has been put in place to oversee this. It's a part of the new leadership structure of Afghanistan.
And can you tell me who that
at
is?
the ambassadorial level.
I'm sorry, can you tell me who
coordinating
that,
director for rule of law.
and who is that is in charge of the anti-corruption strategy?
Newly arrived Ambassador.
That's
I believe,
Ambassador
Enns-
Klim. Ambassador Klim?
Enns, yes, sir.
And are you familiar with the website that I mentioned, the email?
No,
reporting?
sir, I'm not familiar with that website.
Well, if you could find out and let us know whether there's been anyone on the receiving end of that, I'd be very interested to find out.
Aye, aye, sir.
Thank you.
If I can quickly add, there's a key line of effort in the U.S. Integrated Steel Mill Plan that specifically addresses anti-corruption issues. If you look at the Steel Mill Plan, it actually mentions corruption or anti-corruption issues 37 times in the plan. It's throughout all the line of efforts with the Department of Defense as well as USAID and the State Department. So the U.S. government has focused quite a bit on that in its new strategy going forward.
I just want to say to my colleagues that we will have a second or third round. So if you want to vote and come back, we welcome you. Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just sitting here thinking that if our goal in Afghanistan is to try to develop a self-sustaining government, and I guess what I hear today is not very encouraging. In fact, it's downright discouraging. I was there last maybe 2 months ago, and we spent a lot of time talking about the security aspect, trying to build a police force and build an army, and that was right after Marj had happened, and that was successful. But immediately when the Afghani army went in, there were all these allegations of corruption and looting, and so it just seems that the corruption aspect pervades everything that goes on, and somehow we've got to get control of that. And when I hear you all say, well, we know money's leaving the country, but we really don't know what money it is or whose money it is, it seems to me somehow, some way, the Afghan government needs to, if they're going to stand up and be self-sustaining, they ought to have some input into this, but we're not even talking about that. We're talking about the United States dollars going there, and we're not sure where our money goes, and I wonder if the Afghani government knows where the money goes, because ultimately they're going to be responsible. That's what we want to happen. When we send them money, that they use it wisely. We're having a hard time figuring out, just from our standpoint, where the money goes. So that's a little bit discouraging in terms of trying to build this self-sustaining government. I just wanted to say that as a general comment, but let me just ask you specifically, this whole business about multilateral aid, it seems like we're moving more in that direction. And when we do bilateral aid, direct involvement, I hear the USAID guys say, we're not sure, we're trying to put in place some oversight and accountability, and I think we all applaud that. But when it comes to the multilateral aspect, we seem to have very little oversight, accountability, and yet that's where we're moving. In Haiti, we're moving more toward multilateral business. And as I read some of these reports, as much as 75, 85% of the money that goes into these multilateral accounts, this Reconstruction Fund, comes from us. And yet we don't have any oversight, we don't have any accountability. So I guess my main question is, in a broad sense, if that's the direction we're moving in, what are your ideas about how we can have more accountability and oversight in terms of these multilateral assistance programs? Because if that's where we're going and that's where we're putting all our money, and yet we don't have any control over that, that's another big problem. So could you comment on that? I don't know who would be best, but I think you're all working on that. But I'd love to hear how you think we can best deal with that.
Sir, I will begin and then yield to my colleagues. But as I once again mentioned, this office, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, we will take any measure that's appropriate, legal, and ethical, and so forth, to follow the money. And we have been doing that. The capacity of my office certainly has not focused on that part thus far, even though we have been working in conjunction with it and creating the dialogue with these international entities. But as my capacity increases, we certainly will focus more on that aspect of money. The other part of the equation, I feel, is that our own U.S. needs to work more closely with the international community to put in place rules and guidance agreements, if you will, that will allow the inspectors general and other appropriate oversight entities to peer into these funds, such as the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund and the National Development Program, or NDP for Afghanistan. Sir?
Well, I think one important issue, and my colleague have issued a report on the Control and Audit Office in Afghanistan, who would have the responsibility to oversee these multi-donor accounts that are being funded for Afghanistan. But that organization is woefully low as far as its experience, as far as its training, as far as its ability to function as an independent agency, because it doesn't have the legislative authority that we enjoy. So one way to do it would be, and I believe that their audit report mentioned this, is to build the capacity of the Control and Accounting Office in Afghanistan to be able to provide the oversight to these multi-donor funds. That'd be one way to do it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. This has been a very important panel, and thank you very much for your testimony. A couple of things. I guess my question should be directed to General Fields. There was a New York Times article June 6th. It cites Afghan and NATO officials contending that some security contractors, or that companies at least, have been charged with defending U.S. and NATO interests. They funneled money directly to the Taliban, not to attack convoys or other targets. And in at least one case, there is suspicion of a contractor compelling the Taliban to attack NATO forces in order to delegitimize competitors. Do you know about this? As we continue to increase our footprint in Afghanistan and spend billions of dollars to support this war, which of course I oppose from day one, are we entrenching a corruption economy which overshadows our work to foster development, if those reports are accurate? And secondly, let me just ask you, I think earlier you reported that about 40% of your investigations involve procurement fraud. Is that accurate? In your experience, what recourse has been taken against those contractors? Has anyone gone to jail or prison for trying to defraud the U.S. government?
Thank you very much. We have investigations underway in a number of areas. Fraud is one of the principal ones that we have ongoing and have investigated in the past. Yes, our investigations, working in conjunction with other federal agencies, have resulted in either the recovery of money or in conjunction therewith individuals who were found guilty having actually gone to jail. So there have been results of our efforts in that regard. Regarding the private security contracts and matters relating to money somehow finding its way to the Taliban and ultimately used perhaps against our U.S. interest, I am aware of these matters, but we have not investigated these matters to the full measure, and so I'm not prepared to answer at the depth and breadth of your question that otherwise I would like to at this time.
Thank you very much. Are you going to investigate these matters? Because it seems to me that if this investigation shows that these allegations are accurate, then we really do need to look at how we're fueling or funding this type of corruption economy if we just let that pass, if these reports are true.
Yes, we do plan to investigate those matters that we feel fall within our purview. To some extent, we have at least audit work on the way, examining the process by which private security contractors arrive at their contracts and the mechanisms through which those contracts are executed in support of our reconstruction effort. I can assure you that as these matters continue to develop and I continue to build my investigator capacity, we will focus on these matters.
Thank you. And then if you find that the money has been funneled to the Taliban, who takes that on next? What's the next step in the process?
Well, our process works like this. If we take on this particular investigation, this is hypothetical, we conduct it to its full measure, just as any criminal investigation would be conducted in the FBI and other federal agencies in our own community. We will determine who the alleged guilty folks are. We hand off those matters, in the case of those relating to the U.S. justice system, to the Department of Justice. And we follow up, of course, to ensure that those matters are carried to the full measure. But once we hand them off, they are essentially in the hands of the Department of Justice.
Okay.
In the case of Afghanistan, it's another situation. There are not rules currently in place that very easily transfer an investigation from the hands of a U.S. entity to the Afghans with the assurance that the appropriate measures will follow and the guilty parties brought to justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for appearing today, and thank you for your careers of public service. I'd like to start with the general, please. In your written testimony, I believe it says that from fiscal year 2002 through fiscal year 2010, excluding the supplemental, $51.5 billion have been spent to rebuild Afghanistan. 51.5 billion. Just doing a simple division, it comes to, I think, about $6.5 billion a year on average. Has the amount of reconstruction money to rebuild Afghanistan, using your words, has that increased? Has it remained flat? What's it been like in the 2 years, General, that you've been in charge?
The amount of money really has increased during the 2 years that I have been in this office, but going really back to just a bit beyond that. I believe we begin to seriously invest in Afghanistan around 2005.
Okay, sir, in the last 2 years, what would you say the number is? And I don't mean just money for reconstruction. I mean that as you divided it, it appeared to me, money for governance and I forget the other term you used.
Development is the other term.
I'm sorry?
Development.
Governance and development, and then you ascribed the other half or other portion to security to back up the governance and the other item. But to me, since one requires the other, both halves should be considered in one total sum as the expenditure we're making for reconstruction. So what are, in the last 2 years, sir, what is the average of those per year?
Yes, sir. I don't know if I have an average, sir, for each of those individual sectors. Just to preface my
For reconstruction, sir.
yes, sir, exactly. But just to preface my comment here, there are 3 areas which define reconstruction in Afghanistan: security, governance, and development.
I understand. I only have 5 minutes, so could you give me the answer, please? I understand what's within your definition of reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
For the total amount of reconstruction, including those 3, what's the dollar figure, please?
Yes, sir. When I took over this position, the figure of expenditure in Afghanistan between 2002 and 2008 was at $32 million. That figure is now 32 billion. That figure is now 51.5 billion. So within that 2-year period, we have
It's
increased.
about $10 billion a year, sir? Is that the
Absolutely,
answer?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So $10 billion a year. You talked about, your dismay, and I shared with you that there was lack of visibility of the money we've given, no integrated system, and it's been several years now since the new team is on board, which disappoints me that we still don't have an integrated system. The high turnover of staff, which no one's apprised me that that's going to be changing, that there will be more permanence to the staff. So that's $10 billion a year. How many more years do you think it will take before Afghanistan will be reconstructed to the extent the administration is requiring before we can cease these kinds of expenditures of $10 billion a year?
Sir, I do not have an answer for your question.
Will it be
However,
in 3 years, General?
yes, sir. I will tell you, sir, because we did not begin with the capacity building effort in Afghanistan back in 2002.
I heard that, sir.
We are just turning 2 on that regard. It's going to take another 10 years. It will
So
be my guess.
10 years, would you say at a minimum of $10 billion a year for reconstruction, or would it be greater than $10 billion a year?
I don't know the answer there either, sir. However, we can maximize the money that we are currently providing for reconstruction in Afghanistan by better oversight and better accountability.
Would you guess it would be a lot less than $10 billion a year?
I will tell you, sir, it could be a lot less than $10 billion a year.
Do you expect that within the next 5 years to be less than $10 billion a year?
I don't know, sir. But
Yeah, if you had to guess,
I would guess it could be, yes, sir.
it could be.
If
You
we
don't
work
know.
harder at what we do and maximize the dollars that we are providing to Afghanistan.
Less than $5 billion?
Again, sir, I must say that I
tell you,
don't.
General, my point is I'm trying to get
Understand.
my head around this for my constituents who say $50 billion over 8 years. We could have used that here in the United States of America. You said that for the first 6 years before your appointment, that money was not spent wisely, not accounted for. And you're hoping to do things better. But foresee 10 more years of billions of dollars, if not tens or $50 billion more of an investment. And I'm wondering, do you think 10 years will do it? Can you guarantee that?
I cannot guarantee it, sir, but I will tell you that I think, given what I've seen so far, it's going to take another no less than 5 to 10 years to move Afghanistan really where we feel it needs to be for us to seriously begin to disconnect our support for Afghanistan.
Given the present policy objectives.
Well, as I understand the President's policy objectives, it is to commence some level of disengagement in terms of.
No, I mean what we want Afghanistan to look like. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. What we want it to look like. If we change our notion of what we want Afghanistan to look like, then we may be able to spend less and get out faster. I yield back. I know you've given me extra time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And excuse me if I had to go vote and if this was answered, but I don't believe it is. We were talking about a corruption plan, a plan to eliminate the corruption, or at least approach to a reasonable extent corruption. That's a plan that's sitting on someone's desk, right? So we have a plan that's sitting on somebody's desk. We're dealing with a country that has had a tradition of corruption, but we're saying Afghan first. That's this administration's plan. So building capacity is one thing, but right now we're talking about enormous amounts of money. And what we're doing, it sounds to me like, is we're auditing as it's done to say, well, was it done wrong? Instead of putting a plan together to say, how do we ensure that whatever amount of money that we send, or whatever we do with these programs in building capacity, that there's an oversight that is reasonable. Who, in the opinion of the three of you, who is the most capable of that oversight? If you were saying Afghans first and we're saying we'll have Afghan auditors, are there auditors there that are trained, that are capable of doing that? Who should be doing this?
I think it should take place on multiple dimensions. First, the very offices represented at this table, in terms of their carrying out the interest of the United States, I think we should be leading that effort. And thus far, with my office being a new office, stood up only in 2008, that should have been stood up in 2002, I appreciate the funding that you've provided to me to get my work done. And so we'll continue to build our staff to increase our capacity to answer your mail, Representative Granger, in that regard. But at the same time, we are also peering into the institutions of Afghanistan. Again, let me go back to the Office of Control and Audit Office, or the Auditor General's Office of Afghanistan, the High Office of Oversight. Those institutions must be built to their maximum extent so that they can really lead this effort. So it's the synergy that should result from the Afghans doing their part, and certainly the United States doing ours.
Well, one area that I've been told could be done is the pay for civil servants in Afghanistan is very low, and increasing their pay could, in fact, eliminate some of the problems of taking bribes, things like that. The other thing that I've been told is that the Afghan National Police started getting their pay via electronic means. Apparently, their paychecks or their cash would be skimmed by their bosses, things like that went on. So those two things could help, increase or decrease the amount of corruption, at least at a certain level.
I would like to add that it's hearings like this that help to ensure oversight of our efforts in Afghanistan, and continuing these type of hearings, as well as the work that we all do here at this table. But more importantly, the administration has to move forward, given its assessments that it's done of corruption in Afghanistan, and actually put controls in place, tie those controls to our investment of our U.S. dollars. But as General Fields noted, it's going to take a concerted effort on the part of the Afghan government to move forward and to take some action with respect to corruption in particular.
Thank you. There's also something called the civilian uplift. This Congress has provided funds to triple the civilian staff in Afghanistan since January of 2009. They're in Kabul, they're out in the field. Is this enormous, a tripling of the staff, or do they have the right skill sets? Do they, are they in place to do oversight within the country?
We don't know at this time, and that is why my office, SIGAR, is conducting an audit that's already underway, and we're working with the Department of State, the Department of Justice, Treasury, Health, Human Services, and Homeland Security to define whether or not, and certainly the Department of Agriculture, to define whether or not the quantity and quality of civilians being infused into Afghanistan are of the appropriate number to ensure that our strategic interests are carried out. We're also going to determine the extent to which, once these women and men arrive in Afghanistan, are they all hurdled in Kabul in a safe environment, or are they out in the interior of Afghanistan, working with the districts, the provinces, the provincial reconstruction teams, the councils, and so forth, to carry out their respective work.
And if I may add, GAO has a similar engagement underway, and we've coordinated with our SIGAR counterparts as well, looking specifically at the civilian uplift in Afghanistan. One thing we're going to focus specifically on is the requirements that have been identified, to see if a part of those requirements include making sure folks who are going to be overseeing U.S. programs are going to be a part of the civilian surge, not just those implementing the program, but those who are going to be ensuring proper oversight and management of our programs, that those individuals are in place as well.
As General Fields mentioned, that if the new people coming in don't have the ability to get out in the field, then the effectiveness will be minimized. Also, there's a question of whether they, I'm speaking for USAID now, whether they, the individuals who are in this surge have the requisite skills and training to take on these positions. I think what we've seen, and this has gone on so long, for a number of years, that many of the staff are going back for the second and third time. And I guess thus far, for the most part, it's been fairly voluntary. They haven't, I don't think the agency, don't hold me to that, I'm not positive, but I don't think they've had to assign someone without their volunteering. And I think what they're seeing is they have a lot of new individuals coming in who maybe not as experienced as others. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of the newer people who are less experienced volunteering to go to places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Pakistan, who don't really have as much experience as the others. I think there's going to be a burnout factor eventually of people going year after year. Eventually they're going to come back around and have to go time and time again. And I think that's going to be a problem in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Moran.
Let me first address AID's Inspector General. You found this year that there was a 5-year program to build 1,400 structures, and in fact, the structures that were built were defective. They needed to be rebuilt due to a lack of engineering capacity and technical skills. This is not dissimilar from what you found 5 years ago, that the completion of road building projects were insufficient, inadequate. Basically, the construction was faulty and had to be redone. And AID built schools and administrative buildings were either not completed or not even usable. The part of the problem is that we apparently are contracting with people with very limited capability to carry out the projects that they are assigned and paid to carry out. I personally feel it's very important that we give the Afghan people and their own indigenous companies an opportunity to compete and to construct this stuff themselves. On the other hand, if we're paying for it, it needs to be the kind of structure that will last and doesn't have to be rebuilt. But a lot of the contracts are going to non-U.S. firms that are simply exploiting the situation, making enormous sums of money, and in fact are able to win competitive bids because they act in an uncompetitive field where they don't have to pay the kind of taxes that U.S. firms have to pay. They don't have the personnel standards, whether it be safety or overtime or insurance or any of that stuff. And so their costs are substantially less, plus the fact that they don't hire the qualified personnel that come at some price. If they're hiring unskilled people to do skilled labor, well, obviously their costs are going to be less. And what's happening is they're making enormous profit margins, is what I understand. Now, one of the things we've done is to give a preference to firms so that more professional, competent, dependable firms can get this work done. We did that in other areas. We did in Iraq, for example, finally. I think it was a 20% preference. We don't do that in the CENTCOM area now, I understand. Do you think that would be a good idea? No.
I'm sorry, as far as CENTCOM,
So Central Command area, that would include Afghanistan.
okay, so you're not talking military, you're talking civilian.
Right. I'm just talking about an regional, an area, and that seemed to be the best, because that's why we're there, because it's part of CENTCOM's responsibility. We're there for military purpose, unfortunately more than a economic development purpose. But I'm wondering whether AID thinks that that would be a good idea to take that into consideration. We're paying firms that aren't getting the work done. We're paying them much more than they're worth, frankly, given the quality of the workmanship.
Well, I think the strategy of the administration or the government is to develop the capabilities of indigenous organizations. So I think that's the reason that they've done that through local subcontractors. But I'm not certain of the question, sir.
All right. If we want the work done, sometimes you need to hire people that have experience in doing the work with a certain skill set. That skill set comes at a price. It's impossible for many firms with that skill set to competitively bid these projects if they're bidding against firms that don't have experienced engineers, that don't have a record of quality performance, that don't have to pay taxes or abide by the normal rules that we apply to our contractors. And so what we did finally in Iraq to get quality product, and we've done it in many other places, is to give what's called a preference. Basically came to a 20% preference. If you can show that you can do the work for 20% or less money over and above what less qualified contractors are doing, then you can still compete. Would you consider that to be some reasonable approach?
Yes, I think so. But as I said earlier, I'm not certain that the administration is going in that direction. But I agree from a...
Well, I know they're not, but sometimes they go in the direction that is pointed out through oversight reports that this may be a recommendation. You know, part of your responsibility is to when you find problems, you recommend solutions, don't you?
Yes, sir.
And the fact is we're getting an enormous amount of deficient structures and roads and infrastructure that is built. And I grant you we need to be developing the capability of the Afghan people, but what's happening is all we're doing is developing the wealth of the elite who know enough to bid on these contracts, and then they hire people who are unskilled. They do a slipshod job that has to be rebuilt. They take the money, and a lot of that money is the money that Mrs. Chairwoman Lowy is pointing out is going out of the country. A hell of a lot of it is in this Sherpa district, where if you walk into this community, you see these mansions. And many of these people that own these mansions are the very people that are making these contracts and taking enormous profit margins off the top, because they represent the very small sliver of educated, savvy people who are wheelers and dealers and who we will trust to engage in contracts with us. So something has to be done.
No,
Something has to be changed.
I don't disagree with you. The only recourse that USAID would have is through the prime contractor to recover funding, and we've done that in some cases where we've sent bills of collection to subcontractors who have not performed, or the agency has, and recovered funding that way. But I agree that, certainly
The construction work that we're paying for is miserable in too many cases. Madam Chairman, I'd just like to ask these members, and it's a yes or no answer. Are you aware that in order to deliver fuel and supplies in many parts of Afghanistan, we're paying the Taliban personnel for safe passage? You aware of that, yes or no?
I've heard of it, yes.
You've heard that.
Same here. We've heard that, but we don't
Heard
have
that.
any evidence.
Mr. General Fields?
Same here, sir. I've heard of it.
You've heard it, but you have no direct evidence?
That is correct, sir.
All right. Well, Madam Chairman, we have direct evidence. We're partially financing the Taliban to get safe passage of our materials, and particularly fuel, to where we needed to go.
I would just like to say to the panel and to Mr. Moran, before I turn to Mr. Kirk, the purpose of this hearing, which was frankly encouraged by the State Department, is as we move forward to support our strategy, to support your work, and make the improvements and the changes that are necessary so we can safeguard the taxpayer dollars and also focus on our mission. So I thank you. Mr. Kirk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you very much for holding this hearing, and want to say that in my view, right now, our key objective in Afghanistan for the next couple of months is the success of General Petraeus' operation in Kandahar. And I want to make sure that we are moving this committee and our policy forward to make that Kandahar operation a success. I note that the Republicans on the committee sent a letter to the chair on July 7th wanting Ambassador Eikenberry to testify before us via teleconference. And I think he is our critical State Department National Security Memorandum 32 man on the ground, and I hope the committee is able to hear from him. I want to raise a specific...
Interrupt for just a moment. Did you get a copy of the response I sent to the letter?
I haven't. I hope it was yes.
Well, the letter made some other points, too, and I hope you get a copy. Otherwise, we'll send it to you. And I have been in touch with Ambassador Eikenberry, and I have also been in touch with the Secretary of State and others, and we're trying to make all this happen.
Right. Last month, the DoD set up Task Force 2010 to ensure funds spent by coalition forces are achieving their intended purpose. One aspect will be a particular focus on the flow of dollars to the subcontractor level. For example, there has been a concern about the Sherzai contractors or the Ahmed Wali contractors, many different entities which may or may not be controlled by them. My understanding is state and USAID are not part of Task Force 2010. But the IGs and GAO have raised questions about similar problems that may exist in the contracting and grant process. In particular, one of the USAID contractors, one of their largest, is called Development Associates International, DAI, and they fired 10 staff on June 16th because of allegations of soliciting kickbacks. Do you have any information on why state and USAID are not part of Task Force 2010? Do you think they should participate? Don, you or mainly?
My understanding is they are part of Task Force 2010. I didn't attend the briefing, but apparently a handout was given that shows USAID on the chart here, so I'm assuming they are.
On this tracking of funds, and this is both for General Fields and you, is there a way to track subcontractors and subgrantees? Because especially on the DoD side, we have a large number of construction or security companies that may or may not actually be owned by the same guy, Sherzai and Karzai being the ones in the south. do you yet have a wiring diagram of all of these various companies and who actually owns them?
SIGAR does not, sir, but we have had underway for quite some time, and we are pretty close to reporting out a complete assessment of the contracting situation in Afghanistan. We don't know, for example, the United States, at least SIGAR doesn't know, and no one has been thus far able to tell us how many contractors we have in Afghanistan. So we are doing that by way of an audit on which we will report out in the near term.
Mm-hmm. And will that audit also include who actually owns and controls these entities? Because while it seems like they have a number of names, there has been talk that maybe a whole bunch of them are just controlled by one or the other family.
Sir, I am inclined to say that this audit will reveal some of that information, but the contracting network in Afghanistan is a very complicated one, particularly given the cascading nature of prime to other subordinate or subcontractors. But I'm inclined to say, sir, that our investigation and our audit will reveal some of that which may bring light to your question.
My last question, just I have been very involved, and this committee has assisted me in looking at the problem of electrical power for Kandahar. We have a severe military constraint on delivering electricity generated by the Kajaki Dam all the way to Kandahar. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the British have largely given up on this mission, and the United States has not taken up this mission of actually getting Kajaki electricity to Kandahar. The New York Times seems to have reported General Petraeus has backed the Kajaki power project, and so he is going to be using a substantial amount of CERP funds to make this happen, so at least Kandahar can generate electrical power. Have you seen the Wall Street Journal reports that of what Kajaki power is being generated, it's being delivered to districts controlled by the Taliban, and the Taliban actually collects the payment for the Kajaki electricity?
Yes, sir. I have read and have an appreciation for that article. I do not know the depth and breadth of the extent to which the electricity is in fact being siphoned off or distributed by way of Taliban. I will tell you that I have been to Kajaki.
Right.
It is one of the major generating energy networks of Afghanistan. It is a very dangerous place. They have improved it since I was there about a year ago. It is now doubled in output, as acknowledged in the article. There are 3 generators there. 2 are operational, as I am being informed, but the other is in peril right now and no clear way ahead. And I trust that General Petraeus and others might turn to fulfill this engagement.
My hope is after Kandahar, but it might be a good line of inquiry because the Wall Street Journal has highlighted this, of an estimate of how much money the Taliban is collecting from electricity generated from this very USAID project.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, before I ask another question, I just want to thank the gentleman for bringing up this issue. It's my understanding that the reason they have not been able to continue work on the Kajaki Dam is because of security issues. And therefore, General Petraeus has gotten 2 additional generators to provide electricity so they can accomplish the mission, but continues to support the efforts if and when they can work on it. But I would suggest that these are important allegations in the Wall Street Journal article, and that we would all appreciate additional work to get to the bottom of it. And I think this is an important issue, an important goal, and we look forward to continuing the discussion.
Would the
Thank you.
gentlelady yield for a moment?
I'd be happy
It's
to.
relevant to this.
I'd be
I
happy
wonder if there was to be further investigation in this area of basically our supporting the Taliban indirectly, if they might also look at the money that is going to the Taliban just for safe passage of fuel and supplies.
Absolutely. And I would say to Mr. Moran, it's my understanding that the reason, and Mr. Kirk is probably aware of this, there was a lively discussion between USAID and Defense, between USAID and probably McChrystal and now Petraeus, as to whether you provided those additional generators, because they were concerned that exactly what you're saying would happen, the electricity would be siphoned off by the Taliban. So I guess a decision was made that they had to do the electricity, even though some of the power would be siphoned off from the Taliban. And this is the concern with the Kajaki Dam as well.
If the gentlelady,
Yeah.
it's important that we're talking about two separate projects.
Correct.
The Kajaki Dam is in Helmand Province, and the problem is the power can't get to Kandahar Province.
But if you
So-
cut it off, you would lose the 15% power that you're already getting from the Kajaki Dam.
Right. And then
So
the other
question
project.
is, can you increase the power at the Kajaki Dam, but security problems, as I understand it, have been preventing that, and therefore General Petraeus made a
It's back this
decision
new project, yeah.
to back the new project.
Right, that's exactly right.
So obviously, we're coming to a close. I'd like to add some additional questions, but I'm hoping that we can continue this dialogue, and we will certainly have representatives from state to continue the dialogue in the following weeks and have additional briefings. But I'm sure, given the work that you are currently doing, you're very much aware of all the challenges. I'd like to, it may be closed, or maybe we'd be able to have additional questions. I would like to make a couple of points. First of all, there was an issue before on multilateral funds. And we know that multilateral funds have been an issue, as Mr. Fields have said, for many years. And based on these concerns, the ARTF has multiple layers of auditing. I want to clarify that. Some done by the World Bank itself, others done by private accounting firms led by the Norwegians in this case, and USAID also has the ability to audit projects and ministries funded by the ARTF, and I expect USAID and USAID's IG to do additional programmatic and financial audits of this sort. So I would just like to say, Mr. Gambatesa, there has been some concerns about the dialogue we had previously, and if you can clarify that in follow-up briefings. But USAID does have the authority, based upon the information I have, and the ability to audit projects and ministries funded by the ARTF, and I expect that USAID and USAG will do additional programmatic and financial audits of this sort. If we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars as our contribution to ARTF, then we must have the ability to audit. We do have the ability to audit, and I would like some additional clarification of what we've audited, what we intend to audit, because if we're going to increase our contributions, this committee is not going to be too happy if we don't know that these dollars are being audited. So why don't I go to Ms. Granger next for an additional question, and then I have, do you have an additional question?
No,
Otherwise, I will ask
I'm
a
fine.
final.
I think we've made our points. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Ms. Granger, and then I have a final
I have
question.
one question only. State and USAID have unique personnel structures in Washington and in the field. And, for example, there are 2 additional State Department officials serving with the rank of Ambassador for Development and Rule of Law activities. This is in addition to the USAID Mission Director. So in Washington, we have Ambassador Holbrook's office at State and a task force at USAID that's in the process of transforming into a permanent Afghanistan-Pakistan office. So when we're talking about anti-corruption, the anti-corruption efforts are addressed by both of those agencies and then several other agencies. My question is, with so many actors in this, isn't there a risk of getting mired down in the passing the buck, or that some of the issues that really we're coming back to over and over about anti-corruption, who's responsible? And how are we going to oversee this as we move into Afghanistan and, as you said, do things that have not been done before?
First, I am pleased that the embassy, in conjunction with other communities, have in fact focused on the anti-corruption issue. While I say there is a plan, I'm really saying that there is a strategy that's underway. The refinement of that plan, I feel, under the leadership of the ambassador who is now overseeing that subset of the implementation, I think that will help lead to better answer some of your concerns. I might also point out that GAO published a report recently that addressed the number of strategies and programs that are being executed by the United States and the international community in Afghanistan. My question would be, to what extent are those programs coordinated, of which anti-corruption, I am confident, would be a subset. And we will look into those matters and report accordingly.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say in closing, I'm very glad that the Defense Department and Mr. Moran, and we're fortunate to have him here, as a member of both committees, so he offers a wealth of information. So I'm glad that this new task force stands up to the headline is Combat Contract Corruption with this task force. And we are counting on both the Defense Department and USAID to look carefully at where our tax dollar money is going. So I appreciate that. So as a final question, I'd like you to tell us where you believe there has been progress made with U.S. assistance funding. What are the most significant gaps? Where do you believe programs must be scaled up if we're going to see success in Afghanistan? And do additional programmatic and financial audits of this sort? Are you planning them? Where are they going? We hear of programs that are extremely successful, both on the civilian side and the military side. Both the civilian and the military side have to safeguard our taxpayer dollars. So perhaps you can share with us some of the changes that have, and I would expect each of you to respond, some of the changes that have been made, what is positive. If we're going to see success, where do you believe programs must be scaled up, and what additional steps should we be taking?
I'll take the first stab at that.
Okay.
The one area that we have reported on and we have seen some progress in is the fact that the U.S. government now has identified a specific strategy for Afghanistan and has developed an integrated civilian military coordinated plan for Afghanistan, something that didn't exist before, to help guide our efforts in Afghanistan. So we were
It didn't exist since we were there, since 2002?
We, on multiple occasions, requested those documents, and they were never able to be produced by the previously. But we were quite pleased to see that those things are now in place to help guide our efforts, and that there's an ongoing effort to continue to update those and to work in a coordinated fashion among our various different elements of national power in the U.S. government to do that. I guess I would say the one area that I think needs to be scaled up more so, and this hearing in particular addresses that, is the issue of Afghan government capacity to address corruption issues in particular, and to make sure that we have controls in place over all of the money and investment we're putting in Afghanistan. In terms of our plans going forward, as I noted earlier, GAO has initiated a review looking at what we're doing to certify the Afghan ministries, and also look at what we're doing to make sure the money that we may be giving directly to the Afghan government, if it goes in that direction, has proper controls in place, that we're building in those controls. So we're looking at that in particular.
Thank you.
Well, I believe I mentioned earlier that, I'm still on here, that for USAID, that they really need to increase the number of personnel in country, the properly trained and staffed persons in country, to oversee these programs. I've discussed this with Administrator Shaw, and he's committed to increased oversight and monitoring and evaluation. I'm sure when he testifies next week or the following week, whenever it is, he'll basically talk about some of that. Again, I mentioned the direct assistance issues. I think that if the direct assistance to Afghanistan is in the form of specific projects, we have much better oversight. The agency has much better oversight rather than direct budget support. The other issue I mentioned is in this contracting issue of subcontracting, and too many subcontractors, and you lose control when you have subs of subs of subs, and you get to the point where the prime has really no idea of what this third sub down the road is doing, and I think that's the other thing we should try to limit. My staff tells me that there has been improvement, that there has been some progress, and we're certainly not there yet. But I think it is improving to a small degree.
Mr. Fields.
Thank you. The two that I will address, one, I think the civilian surge that is currently underway is a good idea. And during my most recent visit to Afghanistan, which was in May, I've seen evidence, really, of the civilian surge actually taking hold. We're not there with the appropriate numbers. We're not there yet with the distribution of those civilians, but our audit work will bear this out. The other point, as I have emphasized earlier, if we are concerned now about anti-corruption, we need to focus money in that direction. I think it's shameful, really, that over the course of our investment of $51.5 billion, we have invested in the United States only $1 million towards the support to the High Office of Oversight. This needs to change, and that is a recommendation I would make to this committee by way of your appropriations capacity. The Control and Audit Office and the High Office of Oversight, they need capacity, and they need money with which to build it. Thank you.
Well, I thank you very much. I have one last question. In hearing about, and we've had a brief discussion about the Task Force 2010, do you expect there will be any coordination because you are often working in the same communities on the same issues between the work you're doing and the work they're doing? One of my concerns since I've been in the government is the lack of coordination. You can be in any country, not just Afghanistan, and people are operating in their own, I call them silos of excellence, doing good work, but they don't even know each other. Now, given the issue of corruption, and given the allegations that have been reported, I am very interested in knowing whether you expect there will be coordination between this Task Force 2010 and the work you're doing. Yes, sir.
Yes, absolutely. We will be participating with 2010. As I mentioned earlier, we've already gone to an initial briefing with them, and their goal is obviously to look at this contracting in an overall sense. So we'll definitely be working with them to either input and to pull out what they may find.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes. With respect to the work we're going to do on certifying the Afghan ministries, any corruption work we do, we will be reaching out to Task Force 2010.
SIGAR has met with and has briefed the commander of the task force. We intend to work with them, consistent with the mandate that we must follow to remain independent. But certainly, we have mutual interest, and we will work with the task force to the maximum extent possible.
Well, thank you very much. And as you can see, there is support on both sides of the aisle for the work you're doing. And we're all focused on success in Afghanistan. And in my judgment, and I know that in judgment of my ranking member, work on these issues that have been highlighted in our hearing today are critical to that success. Thank you very much.
Thank you.